WhiskyJason here, whiskey from the viewpoint of an American in Germany tasting rare and exotic whiskeys. This whiskey is so rare I didn't even know it existed. The distillery I didn't know. Dumbarton! Single grain, 20-year-old. This is from the Cooper's Choice. Cooper's Choice is an independent bottler over in the UK. And they actually put about 8 different bottles in the German market at the same time. And one of my fans said, "Hey, Jason, could you buy the bottle?" I was like, "No, I don't even know what that is." He says, "Research it, Google it." I Googled it and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." Boom, I bought the bottle. All right, so what do we have here? I'm going to talk about the history of this distillery for the next 8 minutes about or more. So skip ahead if you want to go to the tasting, which will not be as interesting as the information I'm going to give you beforehand. Spoiler alert. All right, so what do we have here? I'm going to start way back in the year 1936. History lesson. We have a company, Hiram Walker from Canada. They still produce, for example, Lot 40 whiskey. They bought the Ballantynes and Sons Company. So 1930, they had already acquired the Glenburgie single malt distillery, and in 1936, they had also acquired the Miltonduff distillery. Yay! So we have single malt, but as you probably know, Ballantynes is a blended whiskey, so you need single grain. Now, way back then, and probably the same thing today, many of the producers of single grain don't want to give it up. By the way, Glenfiddich became a single malt because the other competitors didn't want to give them grain either, and they turned a negative thing into a positive thing and said, okay, instead of producing blends, we're going to make single malt. History lesson. All right, so what they do on the 28th of September 1938, they opened their distillery, their new distillery, Dumbarton. On the rivers of the Clyde, on the banks of the Clyde River, down in an old shipyard. They actually took 2 million bricks to build this distillery building because it should have the same feeling as the buildings over in Canada. If you've ever been to MGP, same type of buildings, you know what that is. And what they did is not only that, is they took a column still from Cincinnati, brought it over to Scotland, installed it, and it was stainless steel. Now, everyone else in the industry in Scotland used and had used since then copper, especially copper plates and so on. But no, they were using like a beer still that we do in bourbon, and they used it actually to make their Dumbarton single grain for the Ballantynes. And this they used exclusively up until the 1990s corn. And this corn primarily was brought over from the US and Canada, I read somewhere, which I have why, especially during World War II, I don't think they brought any corn over from there. We had different things we were transporting back and forth. And they can grow corn in Scotland. I've seen it. So who knows? Now, the capacity was actually up to 110 million liters of alcohol per year. That's basically what North British does today. It's amazing. So here, Hiram Walker actually now had enough single grain. They had their single malt, and ta-da, they had enough for their Ballantynes. Yay! So the story continues on. They, in the 1970s, I think it was, bought 100 geese. And these geese became the watch geese of the distillery. So if you ever have a whiskey quiz question, which distillery had 100 geese watching over then the distillery, you know, Dumbarton. So moving on to the next quiz question. They also had, in that same building of Dumbarton, they built a second distillery, which I think is weird to call it a second distillery. That was Inverleven. So the Inverleven was a second distillery in the same building as Dumbarton, but it gets even more curious. They built a third distillery in the same, I don't understand, a third distillery within the same building complex, and that was then called the Lomond Distillery. And this distillery, this Lomond Distillery, this pot still was actually then when the plant was decommissioned in 2000 and I think it was 2002 exactly. Bruichladdich bought it and they used it now for their gin production. So that ugly pot still that they used was actually part of this entire complex of Dumbarton, which had the Inverleven, which had the Dumbarton and also had the Lomond Distillery, which I think is weird to have different distilleries in the same building. But hey, Kleinlich and Broder are basically something the same. All right, so this bottle here is a 20-year-old. Oh, look, I did it in 5.5 minutes. Is a 20-year-old single grain. Distilled November 2000, bottled January 2021. This is 58.5%. I paid 110 euros for this, and it's whiskey base number 175492. All right, so this is cask number 211094, and there's a total of 246 bottles, and it was actually matured in a bourbon oak cask. So bourbon cask matured, and I don't know if it was first fill, second fill, third, fourth, maybe. All right, if I go to the nose, I must admit I like. I've had a few grains. We just recently in my German channel had a blind grain, single grain test where we had 6 different grains, 20 years, 20 years. Oh, my comparison whiskey is also here. We had a Old Particular, which I usually really, really love. This was from Bridge, 28 years old. And we also had a North British 31-year-old grain. So prizes were between 110 euros and all the way down to 35 euros. And by the way, the whiskey for 40 euros was in second place. Third place, I'm sorry. The 110 and the 90 euros, this was second place. All right, so this is going to be my comparison whiskey here. I just have a tiny, tiny little bit left from the tasting, and I'm going to pour this in here and hopefully enjoy it a little bit. Good. So, grain whiskey is made differently than a single malt. The first main difference is the ingredients. A single malt is made from malted barley. Now, you can use barley if you do make grain. There's no recommendation or there's no regulation that says you can't use barley. Barley is but much more expensive. So if you're going to make hundreds of millions of liters of alcohol a year, you're going to go for the cheapest product out there. In America, it's going to be corn, and up in the Scotland or Ireland, it often will be also wheat. And so you add a little bit of malted barley in there to get that fermentation going. You need the enzymes. You can't add enzymes, also not to single grain over there in Scotland. So it's usually not 100% corn. It's not 100% wheat, but there's always a tiny portion here of the malted barley. And then you put it through this so-called column still, also called coffee still, named after the person who patented this process. And you have plates, just like you do with the bourbon, with the beer stills. And each and every time with the steam, you actually distill it. And so you keep on moving up, and then you finally have a nice product, which is about 90-some% when it comes out of the still. The pot still, you put it in there once, you cook it, you put it in the second time, you cook it, and you have maybe 80, 84, maybe 86%. So you have a lot more in the malt. You have different ingredients in the beginning, and you have a lot more of the esters. You have a lot more of those fatty acids. You have a lot more of the taste that goes along with it. That's the reason why you can't distill bourbon over a certain point, because you need to have those products, those byproducts still in there to give that taste. Otherwise, be vodka, be grain neutral spirit. We don't want that. But with grain, you would do that. You put it in an old barrel, and then you mix it with single malt, and you actually create a blend, maybe 80% grain, 20% malt. Ta-da! Then you have something which is halfway decent and tastes okay and is much, much cheaper than 100% single malt. But today we love single malt. Today we like single grains. Basically, both of these bottles were not made to be bottled as single grains. Both of these bottles were made to be bottled as blends. But today we have a market that's crazy. So 246 bottles, 110 euros. This is 25,000 euros for one cask. Now take half of that money, give it to the government as taxes, at least over here in Germany, and then you still have 10,000 plus euros for that cask. If you had sold it for the blending industry, 3, 4, maybe 5,000, maybe. You get double your price if you bottle it separately. Of course you're going to go for the money, which does not mean that this delivers the taste profile you were expecting. All right, as I've said before on the nose, a nice vanilla, a nice little bit of almonds in there. It's like a little bit of like a sugar cookie. It's very, very, very nice. This is something I prefer and I like and I drink every once in a while Very, very good. Now, taste it. Mm. This was an old, tired, bitter cask. Wow. My face says it all. The problem is, I just mentioned it was not made to be bottled originally as a single cask. So they used old, tired casks, which is fine for the blending industry. Hey, you're going to put something in there instead that's going to carry the flavor, and this is just going to be big background music. No problem. I don't even think it was meant to be in the cask for 20 years. This was probably going to be a 12-year-old something or other. No problem. Many blends are no age statements anyway, so 4 or 8 years max. Now, this somehow has been forgotten and found, and now it's 20 years later, and they bottled it for a pretty piece of money, and I must admit, it's not worth it. This is a D minus whiskey. This is not something I'm going to go and go, oh, yummy, I'm going to drink this again. For the value for money, it's actually an F. I would not go out and buy this bottle ever again. I would definitely not recommend buying this bottle ever again. It's just not worth the money. I can get a Redbreast 12 cask strength for less money. I can get a Glendronach 15 for less money. I can actually get a Elijah Craig barrel proof for much less money. Much, much better all those products than this ever can be. All right, now there are good grains out there, and it's a little bit of a lottery. If you have someone who is an expert and knows their grain and says, "Hey, this bottle is good," buy it. If you're just going through the liquor store and looking different bottles and you don't know, if possible, try it before you buy it. Otherwise, you might. I'm going to say the chances are less than 50-50 of getting a good bottle. I had 6 bottles in my blind tasting, and all 6 were not a single time did I say, mmm. And that's going to be the question of the day. When was the last time you said to a bottle or to a whiskey in your glass, mmm, yummy? Now, not just the nose, but on the palate as well as the finish. So one of those moments where that's not the wow whiskey. I've had whiskeys where it's like, wow, and you're just blown away. No, just yummy. All right. That's my question of the day. What was your last yummy whiskey? Your last whiskey, not the best whiskey ever. What was the last thing you had in your glass where you went On the nose, on the palate, All right, here the Cameron Bridge, the 28-year-old here. The sherry is dominant. It's a refill, but it dominates it. I prefer a grain that has a good second fill bourbon cask. Use it in America once, use it first in Scotland, and then put it in there and leave it set for 30 years. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Good stuff. This sherry influenced. 55.2 single cask, bottled for a German online shop. On all towards the end, you also have that bitterness of the wood, old, little bit of a a little bit like a basement type of dunnage, but not dunnage. Dunnage is positive, more of a basement type of smell, taste, where it's like, oh, that's stale, that's moldy, and that's not great. It's not, it's not bad, but it's definitely not wow. It's not and that's my problem at the moment with the grains. So D, value for money, F, 110. Oh, what could I buy for that money instead? This was recommended to me from a fan. I bought it. I shared it with my fans. They have now the 5cl or 10cl little sample bottles. That's their problem, not my problem. It's gone now. But yeah, that's the way things are. So in summary, Dumbarton is the distillery that's maybe the answer to 4 or 5 different quiz questions about the geese, about the 3 different distilleries at the same time, about the 2,000 million bricks that were used for it, that had the maybe one or the only distillery that used something from Cincinnati, Ohio, that used a stainless steel column still, many different things there. that they actually are built in an old shipyard. All those things there are very, very interesting. Thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, tell others. And what was your favorite, or what was the last whiskey that you had? All the best, Whiskey Jason. Bye bye.